You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that had, has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoy the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you. Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech and Future Tech Health podcast. I have Edward Sawicki, the CEO of Think20 Labs. The website's the same, Think20 Labs, and 20 is the number, not the word. So, Ed, thanks for coming. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How you doing, Richard?
Good. Tell me about Think20. What's the premise?
So the premise is I've been wanting to be in the industry for a long time. I've been studying cannabis for about 20 plus years, and just really kind of turned the corner in Maryland. Medicinal cannabis became available. So I thought, using some of my background, I've been building DNA sequencing labs, molecular biology labs for the past 15 years. And I figured I wanted to bring that into this space. It's something that I really enjoyed doing on the sequencing side. And then to be able to bring something cannabis related into it really made me want to move into the market. And a friend of mine I was previously at Illumina for about 11 years. He left as well. And we just decided to start this venture together. And then we met our other business partners, Michael Zindel and Steve D'Onofrio, and things kind of took off from there. So the premise behind Think20 is that we're not just a testing company. We want to encompass everything that we know about molecular genomics, and we also want to encompass everything about cannabis testing. So we hope that this market, and we're going to help it evolve into kind of a personalized medicine approach, but there's a lot of things that have to happen to get to that point.
Okay, when you talk about sequencing, are you sequencing literally the DNA of different cannabis plants? Are you sequencing the epigenetic marks on the plant?
Pretty much.
What are you literally sequencing?
Pretty much everything. So what we're going to do right now, we're focusing mainly on getting our first two labs open and fully operational, which our Maryland lab is fully commercialized, operational, and ready to go. Our Irvine facility is about 2 weeks out, 3 weeks out maybe. And what we plan to do is to not only offer compliance testing, but also offer quality assurance testing, and then get more into the research where we'll be doing RNA sequencing, DNA sequencing, epigenetic work, proteomics work, metabolomic work, whatever idea a grower or processor or anyone comes to us with, we're willing to take on those research projects and help them design those projects.
Well, what would some of the reasons be to sequence the DNA, RNA, proteomics, all that, metabolomics of cannabis or hemp?
To really try to understand what this plant can do. The plant itself obviously has been utilized for over 3,000 years as a medicine for several cultures. But because of the recent stigma, the prohibition has prevented any type of research and really looking into the smaller molecules of this plant, because we're not just talking about the cannabinoid profile. We're talking about the terpene profile. We're talking about how the different small molecules within the plant react with the cannabinoids, react with the terpenes, react with other small molecules, and how that can help with moving, medicine forward, with helping people overcome ailments, things of that nature. Because the problem is that a lot of these statements that are being made, there's no research to truly back them up. So we need the research, and in order to do the research, we need the federal funding. So right now, because it's legalized in the states and CBD and hemp are now legalized and you can access them, the research is moving forward. But I think we need full legalization across at the federal level to allow real research to happen, because THC plays an important part too, and we really have to look at all the cannabinoids and not just eliminate THC, because it's been known to cause a psychedelic reaction, whereas a little bit of THC works in synergy with the other cannabinoids to help with different ailments and things of that nature. And that's what a lot of the research is starting to show.
Well, I mean, I know there's different types of, cannabis. They have different effects, sometimes very different effects. So it just can't be only the THC, unless there are different types of THC, enantiomers or whatever it may be. All the other chemicals involved, like you said, the terpenes and, cannabinoid profile. I mean, all that has to play in a role. Otherwise,
Exactly.
Again, we wouldn't have different effects, right?
Exactly. And that's really what we're here to find out. First and foremost, we want to make sure that the product is safe for consumers. We want to make sure the product that processors and manufacturers are getting is safe. So we test the whole pipeline. But we also want to see exactly what combination of terpene profile, cannabinoid profile of what helps solve some of these mysteries that we just can't crack. I mean, for instance, if you look at like Dr. Sanjay Gupta's special weeds and Charlotte's Web, and how much CBD was instrumental in helping her stop having 300 seizures a week and knock it down to 1 or 2, and now she's developing at a normal rate. And it's been years. She was only supposed to live to about 8 years old, and I think now she's probably 12 or older. So it's just amazing, and the mystery behind it all can really be unraveled with science. And now we have the tools and the ability to actually do that.
Are you studying only the consumable portion of cannabis, or are you trying to study the whole plant? The root system, the stems, all the other elements of it. Is there anything there to be learned right now, or is there too much to learn just from the consumable portion?
Well, there's so much to learn. I mean, for instance, we actually did the first real draft map of the proteome, and we found about 17,000 proteins. And now it's just it just opened a bigger box to where we know that there's so much that hasn't been learned yet. So now we're diving into metabolomics, the smaller molecules, genetic profiles, because like you said, I mean, there's so many different strains, and we're trying to sequence as many as we possibly can to see where the correlations are between what can help and what tends to not do anything at all.
What about the microbial component? I mean, plants definitely have, for instance, nitrogen-fixing bacteria. Their root system seems to house a lot of different microbes. I would guess that there's probably a microbial or microbiome associated with the consumable portion of cannabis versus the rest of the plant. Has anyone even thought about that or looked for it?
That's something that we're kind of trying to dive into now. I mean, it's been a really, really interesting adventure the past couple of years, because things are changing at a rapid rate. Like we didn't expect hemp and CBD to make such a huge impact. I mean, when we put our business plan together, it was all about compliance testing and research in the compliance realm. Now we have a ton of hemp and CBD customers that we're working with, and we're actually working with the local farmers here in Maryland to develop a program that does test for everything, that we do check the soil, we do check the roots of the plant, we monitor the plant throughout the whole growing process, not only checking potency, but also measuring all kinds of other different values to see what is making an impact. We're also charting any differences that they have within their fields, because we're big data guys and we love data. So what we're doing is mapping out regions of their grow, which plants grow best where, which type of soil content is in what part of the field. So that's part of our future plans, to really work with hemp farmers and give them an idea of how to optimize their grow.
So again, with all the possibilities, what's first? What's most important, and why? What are you going to look at?
So with all the possibilities, I think the most important thing right now is making sure things are safe. Working with the consumers, because of the huge vape cartridge scare that's going on right now, and we're finding out a lot of it's coming from the black market. Basically, just having tests available to where we can make sure that these samples are pesticide free. And then after we get compliance fully locked down, we want to really focus on starting to sequence the strains, taking a pharmacogenomic approach to try to see if there is any correlation between different strains and how people's genetic makeup have them react to those strains. So, for instance, the cytochrome P450 family is responsible for drug metabolization. So we really want to find out how an individual will react to a sativa, to an indica, to Gorilla Glue, to Blue Dream, whatever that strain may be, and to see if it will honestly help with their ailment. So the future holds, and we actually are doing this now, putting QR codes on all of our products. So if it's T20 tested, you'll have a QR code that we will send you. You can put it on all of your products. It's linked to that specific product, that specific SKU. It'll pull up. A customer can go into a dispensary or even to a grocery store that's selling a CBD product, scan the QR code. It'll pull up a report with some creative work at the top. And then if you scroll to the bottom, you can download the full report. There will also be promo offers and tutorials, because we really want to educate the consumer as to what is a terpene profile, what do cannabinoids do, how can this pesticide affect you. We really want the consumer to be able to access all this information, and we're going to provide it for them.
So you were talking about a scare in, e-cigarettes or vaping. Can you talk a little bit about that and where that came from and what the problem is, or appears to be?
Yes, of course. So what we've seen, and I was just listening to a news article this morning about 15 products that were tested by a lab out in California called Cannabis. And basically, in 13 of those 15 products, they found vitamin E acetates, which is fine as a topical and it's fine as a supplement, but it's really something that you shouldn't smoke. And they also found high levels of pesticides. I think one pesticide that turns into hydrogen cyanide was 51% higher than the limit that's allowed. So it's honestly the black market is what's hurting the legal market, is because now people are under the perception that all vape pens are bad, when again it could potentially just be all black market vape pens. We just don't know.
Yeah, that's horrible.
Yeah.
It's super important, I guess, to really find out who's making what. And are there any controls on makers and purveyors of CBD? I mean, certainly.
No.
Well,
there are not.
I guess you would think medical marijuana there is, but maybe there's not. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh no. So medical cannabis there is. If you go, every state has their own set of rules. I mean, there's pass fail. We have criteria for Maryland. We have criteria for California. We know exactly what passes or fails in the report. With CBD, there is not. There is no criteria. So we're kind of in a very, very strange place where, because we've tested products that people have sent in, and some of them have no CBD in them at all. Some of them have a Schedule 1 narcotic that's over in the UK. It's not a Schedule 1 here, but it's an additive of MDMA. We have stuff come in with pesticides, heavy metals. I mean, and we really can't do anything except report out what we find. And luckily, we've worked with some really great companies, and we report stuff like that out. They're quick about fixing it. So that's who we want to work with. We want to make sure the consumer's safe, and we also want to make sure the clients are safe, that they're getting good product from the farmers that they're sourcing it from, or from the groves they're getting things from.
Yeah, it's funny. There's this terrible trade-off. People don't want regulation necessarily. They don't want to be messed with. But you don't have it, then you get all kinds of possibly junk, and bad things in your products. So it's like I don't know. It just seems difficult. The difficult trade-off from what I can see.
Oh, it is. It is very much so. I highly agree. It's crazy because just like you said, I mean, people want to be safe, but they also don't want the government overstepping. But in this type of situation, I mean, there are things that are being put into these products in the black market that should not be in the human body. So I honestly believe that the only way to truly move forward would be to end prohibition and put standards in place similar to what the states that have legalized have in place.
Difficult thing. How about the exciting part? Are you at the point where you've analyzed, cannabis and looked at, again, the cannabinoid profile, the terpenes, everything else, and found some interesting correlations that aren't discussed? And I don't even know if there's any peer-reviewed literature on it, but have you found anything interesting to report?
Yes. So we've actually been working on a really, really cool assay where we're using the metabolomic profile, and we're able to differentiate between strains. So we're able to actually tell if a strain is a counterfeit strain or an actual strain, because these samples tend to cluster next to each other. and we can see if you have an outlier. That's one of the really cool things we've been working on. Obviously, when we get product and it's nice and clean, the potency looks great. We're really happy to provide those results. We've done a lot of work. One of our exciting partnerships is with Cannabis MD. We've run several samples for them that they now feature on their website and their CBD shop. So you can see the full reports from our lab on there. I mean, a lot of the other cool stuff is just like going to the grows and talking to the farmers, like walking through these fields and seeing something that in Maryland 5 years ago they would have been arrested for. But now it's hemp is federally legal, and I can just walk through a hemp farm, and it's just great to see how things are progressing in such a short amount of time. I think that's the most exciting part, is just seeing the progression.
No, the progression's great, but I don't know, so you can differentiate strains, but I don't know, have you found any molecular basis for some of the effects of cannabis, for instance, or the effects of different types of strains, or I don't know, what interesting, real hardcore science stuff have you found?
So basically, the thing we've been focusing on the most is the proteome. So defining those 17,000 proteins and annotating them took a lot of work. That was really cool because it's something that's never been done. Working with a couple of companies, I really can't mention them right now because we're still trying to figure out how we want to move forward. Taking a pharmacogenomic approach where they have algorithms that they've set up, so they basically have already created the DNA sequencing tests or the data pipeline for what they need, and they've already figured out which star alleles affect the patient and which, how it metabolizes certain strains. So that's some really interesting stuff going on in the background now. But again, I'm under NDA with two of these companies, so I really can't say too much about it. But it is definitely tying in a genetic report from a patient, showing them how their genetic makeup could potentially affect how they metabolize drugs.
What would be some of the what has science seen if someone is a good metabolizer, a bad metabolizer? Like, does that mean that it's very difficult to have a standard dose of any given drug because there's such huge variation in how people metabolize it that one dose could be effective for someone, not effective, or deadly for someone else?
Exactly, and that's what we've seen. Cannabis would never be deadly. I mean, in the history of it, no one has ever. I mean, I think they did a calculation once you have to smoke 15,000 pounds in a certain amount of time to actually overdose from it. But what happens is you get overly paranoid. So if someone's a slow metabolizer, what happens is that chemical tends to stay in your body longer, and it causes paranoia. So somebody who's a slow metabolizer could suffer from paranoia and anxiety if they take too much of a dose. So it's really about trying to figure out if they're an ultra metabolizer, it just goes straight through. So they really don't feel much of an effect, and they need a higher dose to get the same feeling as someone who's a low metabolizer. So it's really a balancing act right now because we have to figure out how much a normal dose is going to be, and it varies for all of these different products. And then we also have to figure out how a person metabolizes the drug. And genomics is only a small fraction of what causes what ultimately makes you an ultra or poor or a normal metabolizer, because you also have to take into account diet and exercise and environment, things like that. So it's so new, and it's so cool to just be at the forefront of it. And eventually we'll see how all of this ties in. But yes, you can clearly see that how people metabolize cannabis definitely has an effect on how they react to it.
What do you think will be the biggest levers that you're going to investigate? I mean, a lot of things can and do affect, how we metabolize cannabis, for instance. But I don't know. I mean, since there is so much to look at, how do you decide where to start? And what are some things that you're particularly excited about?
So I think the best place to start is two routes. Basically, we first take the human profile. So we need to do more research into, the pathways of metabolization and how they're affected from the genetic makeup of the actual person. And then we have to look at the plant as well. So we have to take the genetic profile, the epigenomic profile, the RNA profile, and we have to kind of figure out a way to tie it all in together and see where the correlations start to lie. So that is what I think that's going to be the most poignant. It's going to point us in the right direction. It's going to give us some type of map as to where to go, because there's just so much to learn. And I really think that if we start with the genetic profile of the patient and also start with the genetic profile of the plant, we can kind of start to see if there are any correlations there.
Interesting. Yeah, it's funny. I guess I wouldn't think at first blush that anyone would go to this extent with cannabis, but I mean, it's a super useful. Well, hemp is a super useful plant. Actually, you know what? One thing I thought of is, in some places hemp is illegal. It makes no sense. With your methods, you truly could differentiate whether a given batch of plant is hemp or cannabis, if it has any possible psychoactive effects on somebody, and therefore would be considered safe or acceptable or not.
Oh, exactly. I mean, the federal definition of hemp is basically, because cannabis is hemp. Hemp is just cannabis that has 0.3% THC or lower. So, and it also varies because over in Europe, I think it's 1%. You're going to have 1% THC. Even with 1% THC, you're not going to get that a psychedelic effect. So we can easily test to see if a product is compliant. And that's why with a lot of our hemp farmers, the majority of their testing is potency testing. At the end, usually in the beginning and at the end, they do a full panel to check for heavy metals and pesticides and everything else. But they do a ton of potency testing all the way up until they harvest the plant, because they really want to make sure it stays below that 0.3 threshold.
Interesting. I mean, so that's already done. That testing is in use, and that does differentiate hemp versus psychoactive stuff.
Oh yeah, we're doing about 10 to 20 of those tests a day. I mean, we're getting samples in all the time. There's 65 hemp farmers in Maryland alone, and we don't just service Maryland for hemp and CBD because you can actually ship it. So we have customers sending us product all the way from Oregon.
Are people at the point? Interesting. Well, I guess another question is, so how fast do you see this evolving, and what are some of the first areas in which there's going to be additional testing on, in cannabis and hemp?
I really see this evolving at the state level. What I've seen is a lot of states have already implemented mandatory testing for hemp and CBD products, just because it's needed. It's not done at the federal level. It's not regulated with the FDA. But to really make sure that the consumer is safe, I think it's smart for these states to kind of step in and say, listen, you're not allowed to sell product unless it's fully tested. So I think that's going to be I think testing is going to be I think people are really starting to pay attention to it now because of with what's happened recently with the vape scare, but also, making sure that the hemp that is sent falls within federal guidelines. Also making sure that the end user is getting the product that they're told they're getting, and also making sure that the manufacturer is getting the product from the grows that they say they're getting. So I think the evolution is truly going to be how the lab space evolves and becomes a very, very important part of this entire process, because it kind of plays like the gatekeeper. You're just making sure that everything is correct and everything's in line. And what we do as a company is we don't put people on the news. We don't put people out there. We basically try to work with our clients, and we say to them, this is what's in your product. Let's work together to try to get this fixed. And at the end of the day, if they're a company that doesn't want to work with us and doesn't want to correct the problem, then we just don't work with them. But luckily, I mean, all the people that we've worked with have been great. So
you said there is peer-reviewed literature. I mean, who is funding research into hemp and cannabis, and are there particular publications that specialize in it, or what kind of people are working in this field?
Yeah, so there are some universities that are doing some research. A lot of it's private. For instance, a company, Medicinal Genomics, just worked with a private investor to do a lot of sequencing of some cannabis plants. There is some cannabis-focused literature out there. You're starting to see more articles pop up in conventional scientific journals, which is very promising to me because it just shows that there's a lot more interest in the space and things like that. So I think as you'll see one-offs here and there, like I've read quite a few in prominent journals, but I really think that we'll start to see an influx of peer-reviewed articles in the coming months and years, especially around the cannabis space.
Very good, very good. So where's the best place to find out more? How can people get in touch?
Oh, the best place to find out about Think20 or the best place to find out about cannabis?
Oh, well, cannabis. There's a million places, but in particular, Think20. Yeah, how do people get in touch with you or the company and find out more?
I would definitely suggest going to our website first. We have a ton of information there. All of our bios are there. We have a great team. Basically, you can also go to Cannabis MD's website, go to Shop CBD, and you'll see us there as well. Videos of our lab in Irvine, some of the testing that we perform. And we're going to be adding more and more scientific content with Cannabis MD to that site as well. So this relationship just started, and it's going to continue to evolve. And we're going to be putting out science articles and tutorials and things like that there, along with our website as well.
Well, very good. Well, I appreciate you coming on the call. Thanks, Ed.
Oh, thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Richard.
You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.